Hello, today I'll be reviewing the Model 8 from Geometric Future, and if you hadn't heard of Geometric Future, neither had I until very recently. That's because they're a fairly new company. They actually only have two cases. This is their larger case, the Model 8, but they also have a smaller Model 6. The Model 8 is available in a variety of designs and colours, pricing wise ranging from around about $180 to $200 US. The model that I have here is the Lohan in white. And as you can see, with the motherboard on the side, the GPU in an upright position, Geometric Future really haven't played it safe at all with its first lot of cases. Whether that was a good decision or not, we're going to be finding out in this video. So the first thing to say about the Model 8 is it's a fairly large case, measuring in at 500 by 230 by 500 millimeters. The Model 8 has tempered glass panels on both sides. Both of these panels have a fairly dark tint, with the only difference between the two panels being the Geometric Future logo on the front side panel. To remove the side panels, you simply need to loosen the captive thumb screws at the back, slide the panel backwards, then tilt it away and lift. The other side panel is removed in exactly the same way. When you remove the tempered glass panels, you'll notice how heavy and well built they are, as they're made from 4mm thick tempered glass. Taking a look at the front I/O, we've got a total of 4 USB Type-A ports, 2 are USB 2.0 and 2 are USB 3.0, although unfortunately there's no Type-C port included. We've got a separate headphone and microphone jack and a power and reset button. On the top of the case we've got a mesh panel. According to the instruction manual, it's just a simple matter of sliding the panel backwards and lifting upwards to remove it. However, the panel is incredibly stiff and it took me probably about 5 or 10 minutes to get it removed. There's no dust filter beneath the top mesh panel, however the holes in the mesh are fairly small, and as the top is likely to be an exhaust, this shouldn't cause any problems. With the top panel removed, you can see we've got a fairly large compartment at the top. The top of our power supply is going to go over to the right hand side, then we've got the cutout for our motherboard's I/O, and then we've got a range of PCI expansion slot covers for mounting our graphics card in 2 different orientations. All the cables coming from these devices are then going to have to run in this top compartment towards the rear of the case where there's a cutout for them to exit. Because of the additional length, Geometric Future included an extension cable for your power supply in the accessory bag. Removing the case's front panel is just a simple matter of pulling it forward. However, there's probably no point removing it because the frame beneath the front panel is completely solid. At the bottom of the case, we've got a full-length magnetic dust filter which can simply be pulled away. The only slight limitation I'm noting with this design is the only way to remove the dust filter is to tilt the case onto its side. Moving into the main body of the case and trying to orientate you on the case's design, over to the right hand side is where our power supply is going to go behind the shroud, and we've got some cutouts for the power supply's intake fan. Our motherboard is going to go next to that, sideways with the I/O facing upwards, and the case can accommodate motherboards up to EITX in size. The graphics card is going to be mounted in the upright position, and we've got 2 different orientations for mounting it. It can be plugged directly into the motherboard without the need for a riser cable, and we've got 7 expansion slot covers in this orientation. Just in front of these we've got 3 expansion slot covers at 90 degrees, and in this orientation the graphics card is going to be mounted towards the front of the case with the fans facing forward. To use this orientation you're going to have to use a riser cable, and this isn't included with the case. The Model 8 can accommodate fairly large graphics cards up to 400mm in length without any bottom fans. In terms of fan support, at both the bottom and the rear of the case you're going to be able to fit up to 3 120 or 3 140mm fans, although in the build guide I put together in the case I was able to fit 4 120mm fans at the bottom. In terms of radiator support, it's up to a 360 or 280mm radiator at the bottom, up to a 420mm radiator at the rear, and up to a 120mm radiator at the top. One of the really cool features about this case is you're going to be able to mount your AIO tubes in the compartment at the top of the case, because there's a little cutout beside the top fan to allow the tubes to pass into the main body of the case. Mounting your tubes in this way is going to give you the advantage of making them much less visible and also keep them out of the way of the upright GPU. The only slight disadvantage of this is your rear mounted radiator is going to have to be in a tubes up position to use this feature. However, if you prefer, you can of course mount it in a tubes down position and have the tubes running through the main body of the case. If you prefer to go with an air cooler, you'll be pleased to hear the case will accommodate air coolers up to a maximum height of 170mm. Moving into the rear compartment, you can see the large cutout we have for our power supply, and the case will accommodate full-size ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 220mm. In terms of cable routing space, this looks fairly good at 29mm. We've got plenty of cable tie-down points, and it's good to see that we've got lots of Velcro cable straps included in the accessory bag. We've got plenty of cutouts through to the main body of the case. It's hard to say if these are in sensible positions or not, given the case's unusual layout, although it is a little bit disappointing not to see any rubber grommets included in a case of this price point. In terms of drive mounting locations, you're going to mount 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drives on these removable brackets at the back of the case. The case comes with 4 of the drive brackets included, although there is space for an additional 2 down at the bottom right hand side. Using these brackets you can mount a maximum of 6 2.5-inch drives, or 3 3.5-inch drives and 3 2.5-inch drives. What I want to do now is give you a closer look at the build I've put together in the case. So I think you'll agree the build looks stunning, but what about the temperatures? So our 12700K idled at 35 degrees and reached a maximum of 85 degrees during a 10-minute IDA64 stability test. The 3070 Ti idled at 50 degrees and reached a maximum of 72 under load. In terms of noise levels, these were fairly good at idle at only 33 decibels, while during the IDA64 stability test the average noise levels were 50 decibels, putting them in the higher end of the moderate range. The next thing I wanted to test was changing the orientation of the graphics card, so having the graphics card fans facing the side of the case using a riser cable. Now when I was doing my build guide I did predict that the graphics card would overheat in this position due to the close location of its intake fans to the tempered glass side panel, and I couldn't have been more wrong. In this orientation our CPU ran 1 degree hotter at idle and was 2 degrees hotter under load. However, it was completely the opposite story, with the graphics card being 1 degree cooler at idle and 2 degrees cooler under load. This configuration was also 1 decibel quieter, so very pleasantly surprised by these results. Geometric Future have obviously done their homework in deciding where they're going to lay out these slots, and the slots are far enough back from the tempered glass side panel to prevent the graphics card overheating. And I think a large part of this is the bottom intake fans blowing right up are obviously providing the graphics card with enough fresh air. It is important to say that we do have 3 slots in this orientation, and I did install it in the 2 further back in the case, so keeping the graphics card a little bit further away from that tempered glass panel. The final configuration that I wanted to test was simply flipping the fans round on the AIO and having them set to intake. And I almost didn't test this configuration because while I was expecting my CPU temperatures to improve significantly, blowing all that hot air directly into the GPU's intake fans, I was expecting the GPU to overheat, and I thought this would be a bad idea. But for completeness, I thought I should probably test it. So as expected, our CPU temperatures did come down significantly by 4 degrees at idle and 5 degrees under load. However, my prediction on the GPU temperatures was wrong again, and our GPU temperatures actually came down by 1 degree at idle, and there was no difference to the GPU temperatures under load. And as I've shown in the past, having the AIO set to intake rather than exhaust is generally quieter, and we had a 3 decibels reduction in noise levels under load. So if you are thinking of doing a build in this case, you'll hopefully find these results very useful, because certainly I could not have predicted them. If I was putting a build together in this case, I would still stick with the one I did in my original build guide. I think the graphics card in the upright position this way, going directly into the motherboard, looks much better and avoids the need to purchase a riser cable, which if you're going for a Gen 4 riser cable is going to be quite expensive. The other thing with having the fans and the AIO set to intake is that there's no filtration at the back of the case. So in general, I wouldn't recommend doing this. The other slight issue with this is you are going to be bringing more hot air into the case, and although the graphics card didn't heat up with this because of the amount of air it's getting from beneath, your other components in the case will potentially heat up. So this brings you on to any problems I had during the build, and if I was building again, how I would do differently to avoid them. Now really the only issue I had was actually fitting our AIO back into the case once I had mounted it to the rear rails. There's a cutout at the top, and because I was going with a tubes up orientation, I was going to have to lower the radiator down before fixing the whole thing at the back. Really the difficulty I had was that the cutout wasn't big enough to install the radiator, fans and rear rails in from the top. I spent quite a bit of time trying to get it to fit. The solution that I ended up doing was just installing the radiator and the rails first of all without the fans, lowering it down, then managing to fit the fans back on before securing everything in at the back. So if you are thinking of doing this in a tubes up position, make sure you check out my build guide for how to do that. You definitely would have a much easier time with tubes down, although the tubes would be on full display rooting in under the GPU, where I don't think they would look as good. The other slight issue I had during the build that some of you may well have spotted during the completed build footage was that the RGB on my top fan on the radiator wasn't working, and that was the reason I decided to turn all the RGB off on the fans in the radiator, but they do actually have RGB effects on both sides of these fans if you are thinking of getting this AIO. So this brings me on to what I liked about the Geometric Future Model 8, and the first thing I liked about it was the looks. I think the upright GPU looks absolutely stunning, and having your motherboard installed on its side really makes the build stand out from any of the other cases that I have used. The other big advantage about having the upright GPU installed directly in the motherboard is you don't need a riser cable. So this has to be good in terms of the transmission of the data and also for your wallet, because having to buy a riser cable, particularly a Gen 4 riser cable, is not going to be cheap. In terms of the looks, the other thing I actually liked, I didn't think I was going to like, was the fairly dark tint on the tempered glass side panels. I'm not a big fan of this, but actually in this particular build with the color scheme that I went for, it actually worked really well. Something else that worked really well was the cutout beside the top fan for routing the cables, and in fact there's only a very tiny amount of our AIO cables that are on display. So this was a really smart idea and makes the build look so much cleaner. So this brings me on to the things I didn't like about the Model 8. And while in general I was fairly impressed with the build quality of the tempered glass side panels and how thick and heavy they were and how well built the steel frame was, I did have a few issues with some of the build quality. The biggest issue I think that I had was with this top panel. It was incredibly difficult to remove, and when I first got the case out I tried all different ways to remove it. Despite having the instruction manual telling me what I needed to do, I could not get the panel off. And about 15 minutes later, I suddenly managed to get it off. I've had to remove it and put it back on a number of times for different configurations and different testing. And I'm even having to use a screwdriver, wedging it into the gap and pulling to get the panel off. So I don't think this is acceptable, and I think Geometric Future need to think about a new design mechanism for mounting the top panel on this case. It could be that I've just got a really bad one, but as more of the cases come out, we'll see what other reviewers say about the top panel. In terms of the tempered glass side panels, I thought removing and putting them back in was a little bit fiddly. If you remove it just a small amount, the panel will tilt out. The problem is if you pull it back a little bit too far, it gets stuck in at the front. As well, I thought there was a few things missing from a case costing $200. The first was a front panel type C connector. Although it was good to see we had 4 type A connectors, I think there definitely should be a type C connector in a case in this price point. The other thing I would definitely like to have seen was rubber grommets on the cutouts, because you were able to see the cables at the back of the case through the holes at the front. The other thing that I think it's important for me to point out is the disadvantages of this type of layout with the motherboard on its side and the graphics card mounted vertically. The big advantage of this is that you're going to be able to mount the graphics card in this orientation without the riser cable, but it does come at some disadvantages. I think the first is that you're going to have a lot of space at the bottom of the case that isn't used, and it does look slightly out of place to me. I think this is made worse by the fact that there's no rubber grommets, and then you can see all the cables through the cutouts at the back. I think some rubber grommets would definitely have hidden this slightly. The other thing that didn't look so good in this orientation to me was the RAM. In this position you tend to see the back side of the RAM with the stickers on it, which doesn't tend to look as good as the other side of the RAM that you tend to look at in the traditional layout. The other potential issue you might get yourself into is with the cable length. Because the cables are all going to pass into this top compartment to plug into the motherboard, they're going to need to be significantly longer. And Geometric Future acknowledge this by providing an extension cable for your power supply, but obviously there's nothing they can do about your motherboard cables. If, like me, you've got them all routed onto your desk and they're at the perfect length, you can't simply change into this case because they're not going to be long enough, and you would have to reroute all the cables, and they might actually not be long enough to reach the motherboard because they're going to have to run to here rather than just the back of the case like they would in a traditional build. So now we've reached the point in the video where I need to tell you should you go out and get this case. So as you can see from the build I've got in front of me, you can come up with quite a stunning build, and yours is definitely going to stand out with the motherboard on its side and the GPU upright. But as I've mentioned, this case is not perfect. It is, however, quite an expensive case at almost $200 to not be perfect, but you have to factor in that you're going to get an upright GPU without the need for a riser cable. And for example, in the Lian Leo 11 Dynamic Evo, the riser cable that you're going to get in that case is around about $100. So having this solution where your graphics card can go straight into the motherboard is going to save you a significant amount of money, and you're going to have to factor that in to the price point. The other thing I absolutely love about this case is the routing for the tubes on the AIO. So it definitely has an awful lot going for it, but I would imagine the next model of it is going to be even better if they address some of those issues, particularly with the top panel and the rubber grommets on it. I think this could be a really good case. But if you do like it, I can definitely recommend going out and getting it, because as you can see, you can come up with a pretty stunning build. So hopefully you have found this video useful. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.